Welcome to the program, everyone. Thanks for joining us as we spend this next hour together. I'm Kelly Wright. And as always, I do hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family. Opening observations tonight. Wake up, everybody. It's time to get woke and stay woke. It reminds me of that famous song made by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and Teddy Pendergrass was the lead singer. Wake up, everybody. The lyrics are still strong and so appropriate to what we see going on in our society today. It basically stated, wake up, everybody. No more sleeping in bed, no more backward thinking. It's time for thinking ahead. And yet we find ourselves mired in controversy and stinking thinking as it relates to how do we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic from a federal government perspective, and how do we deal with it on a local level as it affects our lives, particularly in our communities. In addition to that, it also said there's so much hatred, war, and poverty. Wake up all the teachers, it's time to teach a new way. And yet that's so true, because we still don't know about reopening schools, and some schools are in fact reopening with distance learning. And then it talks about taking care of senior citizens and making them well. And certainly they're the most vulnerable in this COVID-19 pandemic. And then what it really says that's so critical, the world won't get any better if we just let it be. We've got to change it, you and me. And certainly you and I have an obligation to each other to help each other get through this COVID-19 pandemic, to get through the racial divide, to get through all the problems we're going through. And we have to do it together. And those are my opening observations. Well, one of the things that's going on right now is, for many months, President Donald Trump said the coronavirus will disappear. However, he appeared to change course and reset his messaging during a news conference at the White House on Tuesday, acknowledging the message that his top scientists have been stating all along. And here's what he said.
It will probably, unfortunately, get worse before it gets better. Something I don't like saying about things, but that's the way it is. It's what we have. You look over the world, it's all over the world.
Some critics of the president say the president is changing his tone due to concern he has about the upcoming election. His challenger, former Vice President Joe Biden, is leading in the polls. Also on Tuesday, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee criticized President Trump's overall response to the coronavirus pandemic.
This man simply doesn't understand. He can't deal with our economic crisis without serving and saving and solving the public health crisis. For all his bluster about his expertise on the economy, he's unable to explain how it will actually help working families hit the hardest. He's quit on you, and he's quit on this country.
So let's break this down. Let's look at it from an analysis standpoint from political analyst Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, as she breaks down what we're hearing from President Trump, as well as former Vice President Joe Biden, who, of course, is the presumptive presidential nominee for the Democrat Party. So, Avis, here we are. We're looking at the president coming out yesterday, showing himself to be presidential about coronavirus. Mm-hmm. Let's start with him first. Do you think he was doing this as a way of re-engineering his re-election bid?
Yeah, he could see the polls. I mean, he's seeing that he's drowning horribly. I've seen gaps as much as 15 points with Biden ahead in some polls. And so I believe that finally, perhaps some people on his reelection team was able to get through to him that his haphazard, just irresponsible strategy was not working, and that he needed to be able to present a more realistic tone to actually what's happening. And so, but with that said, we've seen this story before. We've all witnessed teleprompter Trump before, where he can read the script, but it's very hard for him to stay on script. So I don't expect this to be a lasting shift for him in terms of tone. I expect him to revert back to his typical spiel about, and he did, even in that presentation, he did say things like, it's just going to, vanish, go away one day. I mean, he can't help himself, right? So yeah, that was his, I'm not a president, but I play one on TV moment. But actually being able to act presidential in a real sense for an extended amount of time, even in the midst of a crisis, I still don't expect that to happen.
Well, talk to me, if you will, about the other side of the coin. That's the Democrat side. Former Vice President Joe Biden coming out and stating that President Trump has had a dereliction of duty and that he has failed the American people.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because we were just talking the other day about how the Democrats are poor at messaging. And I was like pleasantly surprised to see that they had pulled out a good message in sort of bringing up this fact and reminding the American people that this is a president who has abandoned the American people, in essence, right? He has not lived up to his charge of providing leadership in this critical moment. And so harping on that was smart, I think, by the Biden campaign. But I do have a criticism of the Biden campaigns in terms of the content that was in the speech that was delivered the other day. And it almost pains me to say this because, as a policy analyst and researcher and someone who worked in the think tank world in Washington, D.C., in the policy advocacy space for many, many years, one of the main policies that I spent a lot of years working on and trying to push in terms of getting policy action on was this issue of support for caregivers, was this issue of making childcare more affordable for families, because in most states in this nation, actually childcare is as expensive or more expensive than college tuition. So these are real issues that need to be addressed, right? My challenge, however, was in this moment, what's at the center of people's mind is this coronavirus. And that really is the most fatal subject, I believe, probably even more damaging to the president than the economy. No one was really talking about childcare in this moment. So why, while I understand that this is an important issue, I don't understand why they made that the centerpiece of yesterday's speech, especially since unless you're an essential worker, who in the middle of the pandemic is going to take their child to a childcare center? It defies logic. I mean, it would have made much more sense, and it would have tied into the messaging that Trump has abandoned the American people if you say, I won't. Here is my plan for how we will deal with the coronavirus to keep you and your family safe, because he has abandoned his duty, but I won't. I will protect your family, and here's how I would do it. That would have made infinitely more sense in terms of a message that he could have driven home. Instead, he's off on a tangent on something that absolutely makes no sense for this moment. And, I also wonder, how can you have, as a campaign or as a Democratic Party, get behind a message, and I think this is true, that it makes no sense to push schools to open when you have no plan to make sure that they do it safely, but at the same time say, but we're going to make sure that you can afford to send your child to childcare. So you're putting your child at risk in a childcare facility versus a school. I mean, logic. I just don't understand it.
We'll be back with more of the program right after this message. Before I let you go, the stimulus package.
Yes.
The fight on Capitol Hill, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And are we so accustomed to this now?
Yeah.
We are in the need of dire emergency situations for so many families in this country because of the disruption of the economy from COVID-19. And Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, is coming up with his own plan along with the Republicans. They're not working with the Democrats. Surprise, surprise.
Right.
And now there's even fighting amongst the Republicans. You've got Ted Cruz, who's saying, and I'm quoting him, hell no, I won't vote for this. And then they're fighting with the White House. What gives with Congress not being able to address the elephant in the room, and that's COVID-19, and providing the necessary stimulus plan to help the American people in this critical hour of need?
Here's my thing. I mean, it's disappointing to see the Republicans at a point of chaos here, or nothing really happening there. But I'm not too surprised, I guess, by seeing what's going on there right now. What's happening with the Republican Party is that people are seeing how Trump is doing, so they are jockeying for their ideological positions, and it will be something to see what actually their bill looks like. But once again, I'm gonna have to criticize the Democrats, because what are the Democrats doing? I mean, so what they're saying is, well, we need to just, they're thinking, here's the problem with Democrats. Once again, I know you get tired of me complaining about Democrats, but here's the problem with Democrats. They really want to legislate, and maybe that's a good thing. They're legislators. That's what they were elected to do. They are interested in following the rules of actually how to get a bill done.
Right.
But they don't think about politics, which is a very important part of how to get a bill done, right? So, and I say that because Democrats are saying, well, we're just going to wait to see what the Republicans come up with, and then we will look to work with that. We'll look to see how we can shape that. Instead of saying, let's come up with our own and even though we know that we don't have the majority in the Senate, we can use that to make a case directly to the American people around, here is how we are fighting for you. And then when the Republicans don't support it, you are in a politically advantaged position. You do want to take over the Senate, right? Show people what you would do with it if you actually had control of the Senate. Stop being so passive. It just drives me nuts.
Yeah, we are at a strange time. I know these are unprecedented times, but I find it very strange that we have these leaders that have been elected to serve the American people, government by the people and for the people, and these strange and difficult times where people are dying. There were 62,000 cases of COVID just yesterday.
Oh my
We
God.
have governors in southern states who are trying to, sue some of their leaders on a local level, like in Georgia. We have this confusion that's going on at a time that we seriously need clarity in order to lead this country. And it surprises me, Avis, that members of Congress have not created their own task force to go out and deal with it among their constituents. In addition to that, have not had dialogue between both parties, black, white, brown, yellow, about race in this country. They're not willing to have or engage, from what I can see, as just a man trying to do the best I can in this country and for the world for that matter. But let's have a conversation about how we heal as a nation and move forward.
Yeah. Once again, first of all, kudos to everything you just said. Absolutely right. It's beyond disappointing to see where we are in this sort of purgatory, I guess, as it relates to this issue. No one's taking leadership, so we're just sort of stuck in this purgatory. We're not moving forward. If anything, we're moving backwards, right? And once again, I think this goes to the predisposition of Democrats to think in a very narrow way about, my job is just to legislate. So, in terms of the issue around the racial challenges that we have now finally begin to look at through the Black Lives Matter movement in a more substantive way. You had the bill that was introduced in the House. We know that the bill that was introduced in the Senate was really, to me, a joke. And then that was kind of it, because the two aren't going to be reconciled. So I guess they figured, okay, we put that bill together. That's it. That's all we need to do. And you're right. We need leadership. We need more creative ways of at least sort of working through these problems, knowing that, hey, a bill in the direction of what was put together in the House probably will not happen unless you have a Democratic presidency and a Democratic Senate. And so how do you get there? You get there by making the case to the American people about this, is keeping that issue in front of the American people in various ways and reminding them about what you will do about it. Having a bill introduced that ultimately goes nowhere, that ends up being out of the news cycle, and nobody thinks about it anymore, isn't helping you in terms of your future, in terms of being able to take control of the Senate and energize your vote. And it's definitely not helping the issue. Okay, so if you really want to be able to help this issue, if you're really concerned about it, you would think of other creative ways in order to get it in front of the American people so that it stays alive and just doesn't become one of those, dozens and dozens and dozens, over 300 bills, I believe, are stuck in the Senate right now going nowhere. We don't want that. And that's in this situation. And we certainly need leadership and more creative thinking around how to address this COVID-19 issue moving forward.
And so the struggle continues. We thank you for joining us. We look forward to talking to you again. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about between now and November.
Absolutely.
A lot to pray about, too.
You got that right. Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, appreciate you. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So we've been talking about so many things that have been going on. The president responded to COVID-19, basically stating now, which is a change of course for him, that we could see it get worse before getting better. That sounds a lot what my next guest has been talking about all along since COVID-19 broke on the scene here in America, and that's Dr. Yolanda Hancock. She is a public health doctor with the Milken Institute of Public Health there at George Washington University, and she's also a pediatrician. Doc, good of you to be on the program. And I must say that what we heard from the president yesterday is what you had been talking about all along from day one.
Right, right. I certainly am pleased to hear him make a pivot. I think he historically, within the 5 to 6 months of this pandemic, has spoken completely differently. So the fact that he's actually acknowledging that things could get worse before they get better, it's not even an issue of could at this point. When we look at numbers across the country, particularly in states like Florida, Arizona, Georgia, California, Louisiana, the Carolinas, we see what is to come in all states, because as we've talked about over and over again, the virus does not respect state borders. So even in a state like Maryland, who's handling the pandemic fairly well, as people travel back and forth over the summer, it puts all of us at risk. So I commend him for finally coming to that realization. My prayer is that he will continue to stay in that space and in that narrative and act accordingly with resources, services, and support.
Well, I'm praying with you. The bottom line is that this is still impacting the Black and brown communities. We know that the Latino community is 3 times as likely, more than others, to contract COVID. And we know that the Black community is 3.5 to 4 times as likely to attract it, or contract it. So what should we be doing in our communities to help safeguard our young people and our older people?
We also have to include in that our Native American brothers and sisters as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just as high as Black and other brown communities. It really is the same messaging we've been pushing forth on your show since the start of the pandemic, making sure that we implement those public health measures that minimize our risk. The first is clearly in wearing a mask. There's a recent Zydeco party out near Dallas where thousands of Black folks gathered, no masks, no social distancing, as if COVID went away. And especially in a space like Texas, where they're running out of ICU beds, they're exhausting the medical community because of the level of transmission and risk for COVID-19. So if you have a young person, a middle-aged person, an older person, any person in your family who you know is not going out and protecting themselves, is engaging in spaces and places that put them at risk, have a real conversation with them. I had to do the same thing. I have family members in Louisiana who are not wearing masks. I canceled my trip back home because of my concern for risk of COVID. And so we really have to think through, it's not just us, but wearing a mask is an act of love for our community, for our family, and in social distancing, because we still don't know. We're still figuring out, is COVID-19 aerosolized? That means 20 feet. What is the spatial difference? When you do at least the minimum of 6 feet, it decreases risk. So why put yourself in a position, particularly when Black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by COVID, why put yourself at risk? Again, we've talked about this before. with this huge Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter, both in terms of police justice and reform, but Black Lives Matter day to day in the choices that we make in terms of COVID-19 risk.
And the National Black Church Initiative, before I let you go, stated on this show just on Monday how it was important for Black Americans to get involved in those critical clinical trials of testing for the vaccine to see if it in fact works. Why is that so important?
It's very important for several reasons. One, because when you look at a population, you want to make sure that the population that the vaccine has been tested on reflects the diversity of the country. Two, you want to make sure that with this vaccine that there aren't any side effects or differences in efficacy based on ethnic differences. That is a very critical component. And then the same thing when it comes to side effects. In the same way that there's certain medications that act differently depending on your ethnic background, there are also side effects that manifest differently depending on your ethnic background. I think it's important to acknowledge some of the discomfort historically that African Americans have had in terms of clinical trials. When we think about clinical trials, you can't help but think about Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee. But it's important for us to, one, address those concerns, two, be very transparent in the process, but three, open up the door so that there's availability of African Americans to participate in these trials so that we are reflected in the study population.
Dr. Yolanda Hancock, appreciate you so much. And you just mentioned something I'm going to ask you publicly now on this show. You got to come back and talk about Henrietta Lacks.
Definitely.
And how that has helped so many people throughout the world, yet it has not been helpful to her family. We'll have to talk about that. That's a topic worth discussing. So I'm reaching out to you on that behalf as well as the Tuskegee experiment, which many people know about, but very few people still know about Henrietta Lacks. We'll talk about that next time we meet up. Dr. Yolanda Hancock, everybody, right here on the Kelly Wright Show. I appreciate her so much. Thank you, Doc. God bless you. Standing with you. Love your advice as always. And we're back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So joining me now is civil rights attorney Mark Harris. He is also a representative of the Ben Crump Law Firm. He's a partner there, manages the office there in Sacramento. And Mark, yesterday on this program, we talked about President Trump considering sending federal troops into the city of Chicago to deal with the violent streets that exist there. And so I talked to a group of young men who are part of a mentoring program called CHAMPS. It's a successful program. And I've said all along on this show, if the president wants to send federal troops into this city, and as you know, Mayor Lightfoot says that is not a good idea. We do not need that. I've always stated the president, before doing anything like that drastic, he needs to drastically and actively engage with the people who are on the ground acting in the role as mentors and doing heroic work to save lives. Am I wrong, or is there something else that can be done?
You're not wrong at all, Kelly. First of all, thank you for having me on your show again. It's a pleasure to be here. This is wrong on so many different levels. Number one is the one that you put your finger on. If you really want to fix this problem, you should talk to the people who are living it day in and day out in South Side of Chicago or West Side of Chicago. I have relatives who have lived on the South Side of Chicago for many, many years. And some of the problems that they've encountered aren't new. They've been problems for year after year, decade after decade. So your young people were right on point that if the president really wants to fix this problem, the best thing for the administration to do is send federal government officials into Chicago to meet with the people on the ground who are actually experiencing it. Mm-hmm.
Those federal officials, if they go into that situation with their minds open, mm-hmm. and not already made up by their ideologies from a conservative or a liberal standpoint from that matter, but if they really go there to learn and hear the stories of these amazing, remarkable young men and women who are on the streets of Chicago, they might learn something and learn how to mitigate the violence and lower it?
If that's the goal. I'm not being overly cynical, I hope, in saying that I don't believe that's the goal here. I think this is a ploy. I think there is an attempt to ramp up a certain amount of unrest. I think there's an attempt to take advantage of any unrest that is ramped up and taken to the next level. I was watching television yesterday and I saw for the first time the latest political commercial, the newest political commercial from President Trump supporting his reelection. And it's the commercial that reminds me of Willie Horton back in the day, the Willie Horton commercial where you use fear, or even Lyndon Johnson against Goldwater with the little girl and the daisy and the nuclear bomb, the nuclear mushroom cloud. We're getting to that point in the campaign. And the whole thrust of yesterday's message was, if you put Biden in, you're going to defund the police. And if you're being raped or kidnapped, or if your home is being broken into, the police are going to give you a recorded message. It's going to take 5 days for them to get there. I mean, that's a horrific attempt to try to stoke up the fears of Americans at a time when we should be coming together instead of separating.
Wow. It's heartbreaking when you put it like that, and when you see that this is the kind of campaign ad that's going out there, and yet no one's talking about how Chicago police and young Black men and women address the issue of police reform, having a conversation for at least several hours, engaging with each other to talk about the systemic problem within their city, and young boys from 13 to 21 years of age and the police officers talking about how they can turn it around. No one talked about that from the president.
You got to walk the walk and talk the talk. You know, that's what the old folks used to say when I was growing up. We've got a president who's operating above the law. And I am very careful with the words I use in talking about the president and the presidency. This is our 45th president. There'll be a 46th, a 48th, a 50th, a 60th at some point. So let's not lose sight of the fact that this president is a temporary inhabitant of 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza. So I don't get too caught up in that, Kelly, but I look at the law. I'm a lawyer and I'm a law professor, and I look at the law. And at some point, I want to talk to your viewers about the law violations of all of this. We're upset appropriately on an emotional level, maybe on a faith level, definitely on a human level, but we should be upset on a legal level in light of what the president's actions are indicating.
And what is it that we should be concerned about in terms of, has he gone too far if he carries this out, and does it violate the fundamentals of our democracy?
We have 3 provisions that spring forward from the United States Constitution that I think he's violating. Some of them are relatively clear, some not so clear. Anytime the commander in chief, which is what the president of the United States clearly is, he's in charge of our entire federal military, and he can deputize state militaries, AKA the National Guard, under certain circumstances. Anytime the president sees fit to use our military domestically, there's a potential problem. There was an act passed in 1878 called the Posse Comitatus Act, believe it or not, the Posse Comitatus Act. And that act said that the president of the United States can't use federal troops in the way the president is using them currently in Portland, Oregon, and says he will use them this weekend in Chicago and possibly in New York. Think about it. The idea of using the United States Army or the United States Navy or Marine Corps or Air Force domestically is some stuff straight out of an old school version of 24. You know, it's Jack Bauer level stuff. This is fictional, isn't it? And unfortunately, it's not. This is truth. This is happening in real time. And we shouldn't, as a citizen, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you're a red state inhabitant or a blue state inhabitant, you should be outraged that any president is attempting to use federal troops in this manner against the laws of the United States.
Back with more after the break. Mark, this is a conversation that I want to continue having on this show, not only with the kids from Chicago, but from from youth around the country, because I remember what it was like to be 13 and 14 in those hot summers where rioting broke out because of the inequities and because of the assassination of Dr. King. I remember how frightening it was to see National Guard troops on the ground and telling me to go home because I was violating a curfew. I remember how that was an infringement on my community based on a blanket approach that all in this community are wrong. And so we've got to have this conversation over and over and over again. And this is a platform that must be utilized here on the Kelly Wright Show so that we can speak truth to power. Before you start sending in federal troops, send in people to hear what's going on and then address it. There's a big purse string there in Washington, and they're fighting over a stimulus plan right now. Why can't they really get down and dirty and deal with this issue by putting money where their mouth is and actually putting their mouth to the problem of healing what's going on in our communities?
Kelly, what you said is nonpartisan. What you said is red state and blue state. I completely agree with you. And we can't let our friends and allies off the hook either, however we define friend and ally. President Obama hails from Chicago. If there was any president in the history of our country who should have been all in on this issue, it should have been President Obama, as far as I'm concerned. African-American president from the South Side of Chicago, and some of these problems have escalated since he was president of the United States. So nobody gets a pass on this. Whoever your listeners and viewers are considering voting for, hold whoever it is accountable to fix this problem and to keep in mind what Kelly Wright just described a few minutes ago. I think what you said was right on point.
Well, Mark Harris, I appreciate you as always, and I know you'll be coming back with more information next week. I should also point out that you're an economist. In fact, you're a professor there in University of California, Merced, and you're teaching people about the economy. That's something we also need to get our head wrapped around. But I'm so appreciative of the fact that you're talking about this issue of federal troops in our cities and the legal ramifications that it has, not to mention what it will do to the psyche of our people in these Black and brown communities that already have to deal with COVID-19, that already have to deal with racism. And now you're talking about putting federal troops there?
I still remember 1965 in Los Angeles, the Watts riots. I became a lawyer because of the impression that left on an 8-year-old child growing up in LA. The smoke in the air, the fire, the troops on the ground, the troop carriers, the tanks in the street. There's nothing like an occupation of your own neighborhood by your own government. And I just think this is a horrible precedent. And I hope I wake up from this nightmare soon.
Me too, my brother. I hope we wake up for it. And that's why I'm a journalist. That's why I'm a news personality trying to use this platform to sound the alarm and actually bring people together, because if we don't, there is hell to pay. Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate you, man.
All right. We're back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So joining me now is Dr. Colleen Hawthorne, and she will talk to us tonight about the mental stress that we go through, the high anxiety that we've been going through in our society. It's bad enough getting up every day and trying to get to work, but now that there are so many people not going to work because of COVID-19, how do we deal with this?
Kelly, the point you're making is right on target. Studies are showing that over a third of Americans are saying that what's going on with the pandemic is affecting their psychological health. That data came in February and March. So can you imagine now? I'm sure we're going to see the numbers when we have specific numbers much increased with the ongoing problem, and now the elevation in numbers again, and then the racial divide and ongoing political divide. So those numbers are going to be even more staggering, I would imagine.
You said it, you added on to the mix in addition to the pandemic, there's the racial divide, the political divide. It's crazy what's happening in our society, and it's actually, for lack of the better word, driving some of us crazy in terms of how we adjust. And that's not a nice thing to say, but we do have to focus on our mental health and how valuable it is. We have to talk about it.
Kelly, our mental health is everything. It's the glue that holds everything else together. So yeah, we do have to talk about it. The good news is that there are things that we can do to really help to decrease our anxiety levels, to prevent, our low mood and anxiety to turning into depression. There are things we can do, but it's so important to speak to people just like you're doing, to educate them, bring awareness and reminders. So some of the things that happen within our bodies when we are under, this level of stress, and it presents, we say anxiety, but anxiety can show up in different ways. So of course, when we think of anxiety, we think of the extra nervousness, the excessive worry. Anxiety is there as a normal emotion for us to know that something's off, that needs to be shifted. When it becomes disproportionate, and certainly that's what's happening with all these stressors and layers and uncertainty, then we can have problems like we're seeing with many people with sleeplessness. We're finding that there's an increase in the prescribing of sleep medication. That increase, is almost 20%.
Wow.
And as we're talking about, that's depression medicine increased 20%. Depression medicines, depending on what they are, can also be used for sleep and anxiety. The anxiety medicine has increased tremendously as well. And so sleeplessness is one thing. Don't wait. If you find that you're having trouble going to sleep, get attention for that now. Definitely not alcohol, not drugs. That worsens brain functioning over time and then creates more problems in terms of more anxiety, more depression, family problems, etc. So that can be a sign of your anxiety. Increase or decrease appetite can also be from anxiety. I know a number of people I've talked to, initially, folks were really eating to stuff the emotions and the worry. And then there are people that say, I just have no appetite. I have no appetite. So that can be a sign as well. Again, when these things get really to the excess, you want to get help, because over time, they're going to be damaging to your body, your life, okay? And then forgetfulness. How many people have you heard, Kelly, say, or maybe even you, gosh, I can't remember, this or that. That could really be a sign of the anxiety that we're having with all of this stress. So again, if it's getting real problematic, you want to address it. Irritability. Sometimes that's really anxiety, right? You're laughing, Kelly. Yeah. So that can be our anxiety. If it really is getting out of hand, it can also be signs that clinical depression is developing, and also anger. That kind of goes along with the irritability, lower frustration tolerance. So if you're seeing that at home, if our viewers are seeing that at home, that really, remember, that can be a part of how how psychologically and physiologically we are responding to anxiety. And then of course, moodiness. Sometimes moodiness is depression, other times it can be anxiety. Again, when your mood is staying low or really bobbing up and down, you want to get that addressed. Do not wait. So Kelly, those are the things. Again, the good news is we can help to decrease our anxiety, but we have to be very proactive and aware. Listen to your body. The body is always right. If you're getting headaches, again, you're having problems sleeping, nightmares, forgetfulness, your body is signaling you, as it's designed to do, that something is out of balance and it needs some help to kind of re-level what's going on physiologically and within your life.
And then we should reach out to professionals in the mental health community to get that extra help if we need that.
Yes, never hesitate.
Why is there a stigma attached to that?
Kelly, unfortunately, for so long, there's been a stigma on on mental health that really should not be. Our mental, health is just as significant and just as much a medical issue as any physical problem of your heart, lung, kidney, any other organ. When it's our mental health, it's how the brain chemicals and the hormones and the circuitry is responding to various things. It can be an underlying medical condition that's first manifesting as a symptom, a mental health symptom. It can be medication. It can be withdrawal from alcohol, drugs. It can be use of alcohol and drugs. So many things. So we cannot just assume that anxiety or mood is just the stress we're dealing with either. We have to know that that's the brain signaling the body and address that issue, those issues that our brain is signaling us that it needs attention. Address it just as quickly and thoroughly and with professional help as you would with any other ache, pain of the rest of your physical body.
Very good advice, Doc. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Colleen Hawthorne, who just gave us some very sound advice, because we've got to take care of the mind, body, and the soul. And certainly you've helped us with that today. Thank you so much.
My honor, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. God bless you. Welcome back to the show. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching tonight, and I do want to thank our guest as well. Here's something that I always hope for, that by watching this program and hearing our guests, that we've ignited, and united to not spread fear, not spread hatred or racism, but to spread love, freedom, and peace. Good night.
Come on, all aboard. Let me break it down for you like this. The rhythm of love is easy to find if you're listening. The color of light isn't red, black, or white, but it's crimson. We all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's all right. Just give it time, give it time. Come on, y'all. Get on board. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness, and we all bleed the same. Yeah. If you don't feel it now, just wait.